Good morning, everybody. David Spader with Spader Business Management here. Thanks for joining us this morning. As we get started on our 5 mistakes managers make here, I want to do a couple just administrative check-in items. The first thing I would like everybody to do is there's a little person at the top of your screen with his hand raised. If you could go up there and click on that little arrow to the right and go ahead to check on the green checkbox that says agree. That way I know you're connected and you can hear me. And then we'll go ahead and get started here. So I see a lot of people doing that right now. Great to see. Looks like we have audio working. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Let's go ahead. I may have used that again a little bit later. So let's go back up there and let's click back on that raise hand button. So we'll do that so our little hand is raised there. We'll go ahead and change that back. Again, thank you for joining us. As we get into the webinar today, we're going to talk about the 5 mistakes managers make and leaders as well. So I'll use those terms interchangeably for our purposes today. But what are 5 mistakes that many of us make or that are very common? And then what are those solutions that Spader's Effectively Leading and Managing workshop can help with? So we've taken 5 of those common mistakes and we've designed a program specifically to address a lot of those. Now, as we get started, one of the questions I'd like to ask is, what is your biggest leadership concern right now? So go ahead, let's get an idea of what's going on out there. So we'll try and do this throughout the program here to get a feel for what your thoughts and feelings are. So what are some of your concerns or challenges right now with regards to your leadership and management team? So it looks like we're coming in the middle of our chart there, developing the next generation of leaders, strengthening our culture, very critical. That's been one that's been particularly challenging for a lot of us recently. At least that's what I've been getting, just having come from a couple of conventions the last few weeks. They're telling me that people are tired, people are worn out. It's getting very difficult to keep our head above water. And so what are some of those that maintaining that positive, productive, satisfying culture can be a real challenge. So for a lot of you, when you have a chance over the holidays to catch your breath, that's really something to take a look at. We'll talk a little bit about what leadership and management can do to set the tone and how much of that culture is directly related to what we're doing and why that may be the case. Looks like our coming in as well, we see developing the next generation of leaders, several of you. Yeah, another big issue as the baby boomers are leaving and exiting the workforce, there's not enough Gen X, the next generation afterwards, so we may even have to skip a generation in order to find those next generation leaders, and training those millennial leaders might be a little bit different than training our own generation. So learning how to do that's absolutely critical. And looks like we got a smattering of others as well. So good. Thank you for sharing your response about some of the leadership challenges that you're currently facing. We'll get back to those in a little bit here. All right, so let's go ahead and ultimately this entire webinar discussing the 5 mistakes managers and leaders make comes down to one thing. Are you the leader your business needs today? Or do you have the leaders your business needs today? That's what it boils down to. And that's a really important gut check. Because as we start thinking about it, you can ask yourself, what am I doing differently today than I was 2, 3, or 5 years ago? As a leader, what am I doing that's significantly different today than I was doing 2, 3, or 5 years ago? If the answer is not much, the odds are we're beginning to fall behind because a lot of things are changing in the environment. A lot of expectations from employees, etc., are changing. And so it's time to put a few more tools into our toolkit and constantly do that because let's see, we're going to use this chat box here a little bit as well. And so what I'd like you to do is I'm going to ask you a question here for our chat box. And I would like you to respond in the chat box here. So looking at, are you the leader your business needs today? I would like you to answer that question. We'll go ahead and just say yes, no, or partially. Those are your 3 options. What do you think here? Let's get used to this here because we're going to pull this out a few more times. Yes, no, or partially. So this is a little bit of a gut check. We have to be honest with ourselves. Are we the leader that our business needs today? Yes, partially. All right, it's good to know where our strengths are, what we're doing well, where we can get better. A lot of partialies. All right, good. I appreciate the honesty, everybody. That's great to see. And even if we are the leader we need today, we know that in order to adjust with or ahead of the demands, leaders meet people where they are and take them one step forward. So our leadership and management team, we want to be preparing for the future so that we can keep that strong leadership position. So thank you for responding to that chat box there. We'll go ahead and bring that up a little bit later again as well. Let's take a look at a little bit of the challenges and a few of the different challenges we see in the environment. One of the first things we see is that within organizations, only 24% of leaders get training early in their careers. As a matter of fact, the same study tells us most leaders and managers don't get any training in specific leadership and management capabilities until 10 years after they start managing people. And unfortunately, a lot of times that's after we've developed some habits that are unconsciously not causing the results we want. And so fortunately, we're seeing more and more people investing earlier in their leaders because that just makes a lot more sense. Ironically, sometimes we'll hear someone say, well, I'm not sure if that manager is going to make it or not, so I don't really want to invest in that training. Well, we think that's kind of backwards thinking, because if you're not sure if they're going to make it or if they don't have the tools, but we don't provide the tools for them, what's the likelihood they are going to be successful? And as one of our clients said, well, sure, I may not have to pay for training, but as I think about this, if I don't train them, what if they stay? Okay, or what kind of damage could be done? And so if I do train them, I would rather take the risk that maybe we train them and it doesn't always work out, but let's give them those tools and see if they can step up to the challenge. Now, some of the challenges of the leaders currently facing today, and the one we probably hear most often right now, is generations. We have all these generations. Never before in the history of the world have we had up to 5 distinct generations entering the workforce. And they have different preferences, they have different values, etc. One of the things we look at in our Effectively Leading and Managing training program is that while there are differences between generations, approximately 80% of those go away if we do the right things as leaders and managers. I'll say that again. Approximately 80% of the generational issues go away if we do the right things as leaders and managers. Now, I acknowledge that there are some important differences we need to be aware of and respond to as leaders and managers. But if 80% of those issues can be common across the different generations and I can resolve them by doing the right thing as a leader, my job as a leader becomes a lot easier, because I can be focusing on specific principles related to leadership instead of trying to become an expert on 4 or 5 different generations. And what's the challenge related to that? We just become overwhelmed. It's so much to try and become an expert, and generations keep coming up, right? Gen Z now is entering the workforce, or whatever you want to call them, those coming after the millennials. The millennials are now a majority of the workforce. There are more millennials in the workforce than any other generational cohort. So what are some of those principles? But we also better be ready to make sure we're responding, because what do we see? That next generation, Gen Z, 66% of Gen Z is reporting that they need feedback from their supervisor every few weeks or more often in order to stay at their job. How many, let's throw that chat box out there again. How many of you receive feedback, good, solid, positive feedback on your performance every couple of weeks? At least every 2 weeks. Or maybe we could even rephrase that. Let's go back to that. We're going to rephrase that a little bit. Early in your career, did you receive feedback from your supervisor or manager at least every 2 weeks? Nice, good coaching sit down. I see a couple of no's starting off. I have a funny feeling that's probably going to be a whole lot more. We see a couple capital no's. That's right. We got a few yeses. Great. Glad to hear that. And so this is one example of where what worked in the past may not work in the future. A lot of you are in, yeah, exactly. Richard, I appreciate that. I only got feedback when I screwed something up. All right. Thank you for that feedback. But that's an example of one of those things that the next generation coming in is demanding. They're absolutely demanding that we get this feedback. Now, should everybody be getting that feedback? regardless of what generation. Now, if you're of an older generation, you may not need that feedback. You may not even think it's important. But to be quite honest, it's irrelevant whether you think it's important or not. It's whether we're going to respond to it, because we're not going to change millions and millions in that generation. And arguably, regardless of whether you're at the beginning of your career or end of your career, as a leader and manager, we should be providing feedback every few weeks to find out whether people are performing well or not. How many of you would agree that? Yes or no? Let's go ahead and throw that chat box out there again. How many would agree that everybody should be receiving feedback from their supervisor or manager at least every couple weeks? It could be a 5-minute sit down. Absolutely, we got lots of yeses, so we all agree. That's a great example. If we do that with everybody, guess what? We're going to put ourselves into that category of great leaders and managers, regardless of what generation that someone is that we're managing. So great to see. Thank you again for responding to that. Another challenge related to that next generation coming in, we better be giving them feedback, because guess what? They're expecting pay increases pretty darn quickly, and a lot sooner than most of us would maybe expect if it were us in their shoes. Or we may look at that and say that's absolutely ridiculous. I can't believe they would expect a salary increase before they even make it to their annual performance review. Again, guess what? Whether we like that or not, and whether they should or shouldn't, is completely irrelevant. The question is, are we going to be responsive to that reality or not? And that's really what it boils down to for that next generation. And again, we should be having these conversations on a regular basis. And as we see here, the millennials and Gen Z over on that left-hand side, we can see here 48% of the entire generation over here are Gen Z and millennials. So half the population, that's only going to continue to increase in the workforce. So we better get our heads wrapped around that if we're not. I know that's one of the challenges we hear the most often. And at the end of the day, a lot of times, I'm guessing a lot of us feel a little bit like this. This is one of my favorite slides, a little bit of an oldie but a goodie. I wish all of you would settle your differences before you come back to work, or before you come to work. And we feel a little bit like that sometimes. So who's setting the tone there? And a lot of times as we start looking at what do we have to do to set that tone, resolve all these differences, we start to feel a little bit like this. There are all these different leadership theories out there. There is all these different books, webinars, etc. And we can become overwhelmed by them, and it becomes management flavor of the month. So really, when we look at our leadership and managing program and training, we really want you to walk away with 3 or 4 key principles. One of the principles we want you to understand and walk away from our Effectively Leading and Managing program is simply this: there are only 2 results leaders are responsible for accomplishing. Everything falls into one of 2 different types of results. What do you think those are? Let's open up that chat box again. What do you think those 2 results are that as leaders we're responsible for delivering at the individual, at the departmental, at the organizational level, with customers, with manufacturers, etc.? What do you think? We'll see if a few of you have been through some of our training before. This is research going back for quite a while here. Let's see what we come up with. What are those 2 results or outcomes leaders are responsible for? Oh, that's a good answer. I like that. Customer satisfaction, that's part of it. And revenue, all right. Development of team members, all of those are good. Excellent. Improvement and customer satisfaction. All right, we got more customer satisfaction there, and profitability. We're saying it in a couple of different ways here. Employee retention, lots. All right, so we've got a lot of different things. Training and profitability. Here's what it boils down to. And several of you alluded to components of this, and I would argue that satisfaction is not just customers. It's also employees, it's manufacturers, it's our community, etc. Thanks again for completing that chat box. There are really only 2 results. The first result is success. Okay, so helping people achieve their goals, whether that's a customer, whether that's an employee, whether that's a vendor partner, whether that's our broader community or not. We need to help people win. That's number 1. When we help people win, we know we're doing our job as a leader and manager. We're taking people where they couldn't go on their own. We're delivering results they couldn't get on their own, and they need our help. And so that's ultimately result number 1. The second result then, and the second S, is satisfaction. We do so in a way that's meaningful and satisfying to them. And when we do that, it builds their commitment And so all the different tools, research, books, etc. out there are generally targeting one or both of those results. How do we achieve more with regards to the first S, success, and how do we do so in a way that's satisfying and meaningful? So, for example, if you take a minute and you think about the last team management meeting you were in, at the end of it, how do I know whether I'm doing my job or not as a leader? I asked two questions. Did we achieve what we were supposed to? Meaning, was it successful? And number two, did we do so in a way that was satisfying to everybody? That they were committed? And so committed is just as important, but we did that in a way that that commitment was satisfying and we feel part of something more than just being a cog in a wheel and pumping out profitability for the owner. So it has meaning. I feel like I'm part of something more than that. It's satisfying. We build that good, strong commitment. And it's not that people aren't just complying with situations. So ultimately, effectively leading and managing, our most effective way to do that is managing employees and getting results through as many people as possible. And so what we want to do is understand that there are 4 types of employees, and learning how to manage each of these employees differently and more effectively is absolutely critical. So this was initially done by Jack Welch at GE, and he's on record as saying, I knew that we were not going to be a great company until we figured out there are 4 types of employees and what to do with them. So once our management leadership team figured out this, that's when we started to move to become a truly great company. So he said the first type of employees are pretty easy. Those that are low producers, so they're not hitting their numbers, they're not generating the work that we need them to, and they're not aligned with our company's culture or values. He said that's easy. You just redeploy them into the workforce. Let them go find a better fit. They're obviously not interested in or capable of doing the work, and they don't want to be part of our team. So what we're going to do there is we're going to redeploy them into the workforce where they can find a better fit. Because the bottom line is that if we keep somebody in a job where, number one, they don't want to be with our company, and number two, they can't perform, we're not doing them any favors. You really think about that. Okay, there's all kinds of research about if we're in a job where we can't be successful and there's workplace stress, that it has a significant impact on our physical and psychological health. As a matter of fact, one of the predictors of longevity and age is how satisfied you are with your job. Interestingly enough, my wife works in the medical profession, and she tells me the single best predictor of how quickly someone recovers from back surgery is whether they like their job or not. So it really does impact our ability to be healthy individuals. So we have someone in that it's just simply not working in any way, shape, or form in type 1. We need to help them out by helping them find some place where they can be more successful and doing so in a humane manner. But we're not doing ourselves or anyone else any favors by keeping them around. The second type of employees, Jack Welch told us, was also easy. Those are your high producers. They hit their numbers. They're company people. They fit with the company's values, and they do a great job. And so do whatever you can to keep them around, reward them in whatever way you can. Make sure you're recognizing them, giving them good feedback. The third type is a little bit more tricky. What about those people that aren't hitting their numbers? They're trying hard, they're doing their best, but they just can't get it done. But they're great team players. Well, we say we want to train, coach, etc. with them within reason to help them get up to speed. And if they can't, then we'll spend a little extra time helping them find a position internally or externally where they can be more successful. And that's something that can be difficult to do when we have to, but what we found is when we coach most people in the right way, we can be quite successful in coaching them to higher performance, especially when they have the desire and they're a good culture fit. Now, the last type of employee is what Jack Welch said. Until we realized that these were the cancer in our organization, we were never going to be a great organization. And he said that's those high producers. They hit their numbers, but they have low values alignment. Maybe it's that superstar salesperson who never follows the process or is a little bit of a prima donna and causes all sorts of problems. But we keep them because we're scared. What happens if we lose that volume? What are we going to do? How are we going to replace that? Now, most organizations have had an individual like that at some point, but how do we deal with that? How do we deal with all 4 of these employees? And let's take a minute on that type 4. Jack Welch said it's really easy. Once we see those, we give people a shot, and if they don't start adapting to becoming more aligned with our cultures, you eject them. You spend the least amount of time on them, because what happens if we keep those high producers? I don't call them high performers. They're high producers. You're a high performer if you're type 2. You're a high producer if you're type 4. So what Jack Welch say about those? We need to eject them. We need to get them out. We'll give them a chance. Everybody gets at least one chance if we haven't been clear about our expectations. But if not, we're going to eject them. Now, I'm guessing most of you have had one of those. And if so, did you regret letting them go, or when they left of their own accord? Let's see a yes or no here. How many people regretted letting that high producer go? I'm going to guess it's not very many. And it's interesting, the research actually tells us as well that they end up costing our organization more, because if they could impact everyone else by 10%, and they're impacting 10, 15, 20 people by 10%, then what happens? They bring everybody else down, and there's so much other negativity that it doesn't make up for one. Now, some of those high producers can be saved, and we want to do that when possible. But how do we do that? And most organizations struggle with that. So thanks again for all those responses. Yeah, we still have a few. And ideally, what we want to do is keep them, and if possible, and convert them. Not always possible, but hopefully we can do that. So thanks again for responding to those. So those are the 4 types of employees. And what we found, though, is most people are really only very good at managing one of those 4 types. And we'll talk a little bit more about what those specifics are. Now, why is that so important? Because we know that leadership sets the tone. We know that culture, in 75% of cases, organizational climate alone sorts companies into lower versus higher profitability and growth. So culture is something that's important. And when we look at that, what do you think? How much of a company's culture or climate is directly related to the actions of the leader? What do you think there? We've got some results there. We'll have you go ahead and start responding there. What do you think? What percent of a company's culture or climate is directly related to the actions of the leader? Okay, so we've got several responses there. Majority in that 70 to 100%. Yeah, it would be nice if we could control everything. Unfortunately, we can't quite control all of it. So let's take a look at what the actual answer is here. The actual answer is that it's, and we just did that poll, actual answer is that it's 50 to 70% of climate is directly related to the actions of the leader. So if there's a department, if there's a location, there's a small team that doesn't have the culture or climate that I want, where should I look? In the mirror or at that department's leaders, because that 50 to 70%, over half of that climate and culture is going to be directly related to the actions of that leader. And oftentimes what I find is that when we maybe don't have that culture, that an environment that we want, it's not intentionally done by the leader. It's because we don't have the right tools in our toolkit. And what's the result of that? Well, what we know is that 20 to 30% of the financial performance is directly related to that culture and climate. So if you think about it, I'm guessing most of you would love to have another 20 or 30% of bottom line performance, and that's the reality. We see that all the time in our 20 groups and others as well. If you've been with us on other webinars, we've shared some of those statistics. We're seeing 20, 30, 40% difference sometimes in revenue generation per employee when we look at climate in a different leadership environment. Now, so we start looking at that. How do we get it? Let's try another poll here. So what do you think here? So taking a look at this poll, What is the best predictor of long-term leadership and management performance? What do you think it is here? Best predictor of long-term leadership and management performance. So we've got being inspirational. We hear a lot about charismatic leaders, inspirational leaders, conflict resolution, self-awareness, being directive, making sure people know what they should be doing. Looks like we've got a majority that are getting the correct answer. It's self-awareness. It's understanding ourselves. Because if we don't understand ourselves, what's the likelihood we can effectively manage ourselves first and foremost? It's not very good. So let's get into the 5 mistakes. Mistake number 1, it's a lack of self-awareness. And related to that lack of self-awareness, let's talk about blind spots. What percentage of leaders do you think have a blind spot? And so think about that just for a second. We'll put another poll up in just 1 minute, but what percentage of leaders have a significant blind spot limiting their effectiveness right now? And this research has been done multiple times by multiple different people. Tends to be pretty consistent. Oftentimes about now, I like to ask, do you know what your blind spot is? And if the answer is yes, then you don't know what it is, because if it's blind spot, you haven't learned about it yet. You may have learned about one in the past, but almost always we still have another blind spot. And oftentimes in adapting to a new situation, we may develop another one, and partly because times change. So what do we see here? Okay, looks like we're saying about 60%. It's actually a little higher than that. Roughly 80% of all leaders have a blind spot that's significantly limiting their effectiveness in at least one area. So that means most of us. Now, as a rule of thumb, if you want to take a really critical component away from this, is if you're a leader or a manager, you should be getting confidential, anonymous feedback from your employees, and preferably your direct reports, because they have the most accurate feedback, at least every 2 to 3 years. Otherwise, because we don't see blind spots, they're going to limit our performance until we figure that out. And we want to look at that in 2 different areas. We want to understand what are our motivational blind spots and our capabilities blind spots. And oftentimes those change given our different roles as well. How might they change? This is some research from Center for Creative Leadership, very well-respected leadership organization. And what they found is that the importance of technical skills and job-specific know-how actually decreases as you move up the organizational chain from more of a frontline position to a managerial role, and then for those in larger organizations into what we would call a true executive type role. So our technical skills decrease, our managerial skills peak in this middle area, okay, and then once you get into true CEO, CFO roles like that, you're actually again more strategic and visionary. And what happens? People skills consistently become important. Your ability to work with and through people. As a matter of fact, 7 out of 10 leaders that fail because of their inability to work effectively with and through other people. Let me say that again. 7 out of 10 leaders that fail do so because their inability to work with and through other people. So requirements change. If we've moved from the front lines into a supervisory or management role, those people skills get more important. If I move from a managerial role to an executive role, those people skills become more important. So we have to be significantly more effective in that. So in our first mistake, that self-awareness, and those people skills are largely related to emotional intelligence, and we really focused on a lot of those emotional intelligence areas and criteria. But look at this impact of emotional intelligence and self-awareness. Those self-aware leaders that understand where they're good with people and how to work with and through people, 90% of higher performers have high emotional intelligence. They've got strong self-awareness in addition to a few other areas. Several different aspects of leadership have shown that almost 60% of your job performance is related to your ability to work with people. And that will vary a little bit depending on position. And this one's kind of nice. Kind of makes sense for me to maybe get that feedback from others, increase my self-awareness and EQ. Why? Because those with higher EQ make significantly more than those who don't. So it's not only is it better for our employees, but it's better for others as well or better for ourselves if we increase our emotional intelligence. We can get significantly better. And so we have several different tools where we like to look at that, and we can plot ourselves. This is just one of the tools to find out whether we're more directive and controlling. How do we respond in stress type situations versus more favorable? And that changes. And first and foremost, the one area we start understanding our self-awareness is fundamentally every human being's on a continuum from being more directing and controlling, and if you want to think about that as also more task oriented, so thinking about the hard side of business. Roughly half the population is going to be more directing and controlling and focusing on that. And focusing, what's that mean? We said the two results are success and satisfaction. They tend to be more success focused. Let's just get it done. Don't worry about people's feelings. Don't cry over spilt milk. Let's just get it done. Let's just throw it out there. Don't worry about how we communicate. It just needs to get done. That would be one mindset and a preference. The other side then would be more of those on the supporting and relating, and their focus is going to be more satisfaction related instead of success. So we have this bias, and oftentimes if we're not aware of where we fall on this continuum, whether we're way over here on more directing and controlling and task orientation, or whether we're way over here on primarily supporting and relating, our ability to work with the whole spectrum of people from going both directions is going to be limited. And understanding that if I'm way over here and I'm talking to someone who's way over here, we're literally speaking a different language. And what do you think? When someone's required to adapt, and as a leader or manager, we're working with an employee, who has more responsibility to adapt, the employee or the manager? What do you think? Let's go ahead and throw something else in that chat box. We'll keep you busy here of seeing what responses we have, so you don't have to just have my opinion. Yeah, who has more response? The employer, manager? We all agree. Okay, yeah, well, look at some of the research on how many people are actually doing that, and it stems first and most from self-awareness. I was doing some coaching not too long ago with an individual who was way on the left side here, very much controlling and directing. He was as far over to the left as possible. And so when we gave him his feedback and we started talking about the difference between how you have to communicate with other people, he was actually embarrassed. I almost felt bad for him. He said, I just didn't realize that my communication could frustrate someone else or sometimes even hurt their feelings or damage them or damage performance. And he said, as of today, I need to do something totally different. So his intent was honorable. It was really good. He was always looking out for the best interest of the company. But that lack of self-awareness was really limiting his ability to perform. Now, interestingly enough, I went to a different department doing coaching in that same organization. And where was his other manager? Way over here. What do you think the ability of them to communicate effectively was without either one realizing the different communication styles? With just a few different tools that we use in our Effectively Leading and Managing program, those two were able to very quickly begin working together at a high level. It was really exciting to see. And it all went back to just some basic self-awareness and understanding how to modify their approach. So looking at our first mistake, that lack of self-awareness, here are just a few of the tools during our Effectively Leading and Managing workshops. That's what that ELM up there is. We look at discovering your leadership style and that preference of whether you tend to be more controlling and directing or relating and supporting, and what the impact is, and then what do we do about that. We also look at your leadership approach, and we'll share a little bit more about that in a few minutes. Then we also look at yourself with regards to your self-awareness. How good am I at giving performance feedback and those end of year performance evaluations? What am I doing right? What maybe am I not doing so well? And then lastly, how adaptable am I? Am I adapting? Am I using multiple leadership styles? Do I have that capability? And if not, how do I start putting those into my toolkit? And what sort of results have we seen? This is a result of a couple of leaders not too long ago that took some of those tools back to their organization. What do we see here? Teamwork in their company, okay, in 6 months went from 30% to over 82%. They had an increase of 52.4% of their employees said we went from being poor at managing teamwork to really well at managing teamwork. 50%. Okay, and they had some employee issues to deal with as well. So what happened? Only at the beginning, only 35% said that they were effectively addressing some of those performance issues with employees, increased by more than 47% to over 80. So the nice thing is once we're aware of those issues and we have the right tools, we can make some really good progress. That brings us to our second mistake, lack of clear direction. So lack of clear direction is our next mistake. So roughly half of all performance issues are a lack of clear direction. And so we're going to ask you a question here. And here's the question I'm going to ask you for this. I'm going to throw up the chat box. We're going to use the chat box again. The question for this, you have those three responses. So just response, my life, my job, or not betting. If I were to go to each of your employees and ask them what's the single most important aspect of their job, how confident are you that they would have the same answer you have? Okay, how many are going to bet their life on that? Let me say that again. If you were to go to each one of your employees and ask them what their single greatest priority is, how confident are you that you'd have the same answer? Okay, it looks like we're getting lots of twos and threes. Yeah, your life's pretty important. That's a pretty big risk to bet your life on that. Okay, lots of twos and threes, great. And that's the most common response we get. But let's stop and think about that for a second. If that's truly the case, that my employees don't know the single most important thing I need them focusing on every day, do I have a huge opportunity? Most people say we really do. And so that lack of clear work direction, again, roughly half of all performance issues are a lack of clear work direction. And it's not necessarily that we're doing a lot wrong. A lot of times it's just sitting down and getting out of our mind and gut what's really going on. Because what can happen? One day the employees come in and we tell them I need to do X, Y, and Z. The next day I tell them to do D, C, and E. The next day I give them 3 or 4 other different tasks. Well, in their mind, there's maybe some priority there, and there's certainly a priority in our minds, but are we communicating why one day it's A, B, C, and the next day it's X, Y, Z? If not, how are they supposed to understand which is more important? They won't. And if we want them to start thinking like us, if we're not sharing why that's the case, what's the likelihood they're going to start having that same mentality and understanding why one thing's more important? It's not likely to happen. So we have to create that time to do that. We'll look at a couple of tools there that can help us do that. Now, why does that occur? Ineffective work direction stems from multiple different things. Now, a guy named Ferdinand Fournier did some research several years ago into why employees don't do what they're supposed to do. Here's what he found. The number one reason employees don't do what they're supposed to do is that they don't know what they're supposed to do. This is research with more than 30,000 employees and managers. And the number one reason employees don't do what they're supposed to do is that they don't know what they're supposed to do. It's that lack of clear direction like we just talked about. And so as a result, what do they end up doing? What's easiest? Where the biggest fire is? What they like doing most? What they think they should be doing? There are a lot of reasons why that could occur. But the second most common reason employees don't do what they're supposed to do is they don't know how to do it. No one's taken the time to really show them and coach them effectively and how to do it if it changes or it requires any adaptability or modification. So there's a real big opportunity there for us. The third reason they don't do what they're supposed to do is that they don't know why they should do it. No one's taken the time to help them understand how it's part of a bigger purpose. It may seem like a menial task. For example, I remember someone saying, I can't believe I have employees that walk in the front door and they'll walk right by trash and they don't bend over and pick it up. Or they don't understand that if you take the last of the coffee, you need to refill it. It's not somebody else's job, it's everybody's job. Okay, now it may seem ridiculous that you have to explain to somebody why those little things might be important, but again, is it really the real issue, or is it really critical that we explain that to them? It is. Okay, it's not whether we want to or not. It's not whether they should know that or not. It's irrelevant. If it needs to be done, the question is, are we going to do it or not? Just being upset and frustrated by the fact that they don't know isn't going to do us much good. So we really got to get a better job of helping people understand why they should do that. Fourth most common reason employees don't do what they're supposed to do is they think they are doing it. There are 4 types of feedback: positive, negative, neutral, and none. Guess which one is the most destructive to employee morale and performance? If you guess none, you're correct. And so we need to make sure we're giving that feedback. Earlier, we said most of us didn't get feedback, certainly didn't get feedback even every few weeks from our supervisor and manager. And what does that do to performance? Now, the 5th most common reason employees don't do what they're supposed to do are there obstacles beyond their control: a system, a process, a person, something else that's keeping them from achieving what they need to do. 6th most common reason is they don't think it'll work. Best problem to have, because there's a really critical word in there. What do you think? What's the most important word in that sense? Why would I be ecstatic every time I have an employee that tells me, David, that's not going to work? What do you think? We've got our chat up there. What do you think? What's the most important word in there? What in that sentence, number 6? What is the most important word in there? They think it will not work. Let's see what's coming in here. Control. Okay, control, control, control. All right, so they are thinking, Chris, there we go. That's what we're looking for. They think it will not work. Think is the most important word we see there. They're thinking, that's a great thing. And if they don't think it's going to work, then I realize in their mind, there's an obstacle that's going to keep them from giving 100%. It's the best thing for me to know as a leader or manager, because now I can do something about it. I should be ecstatic every time an employee comes to me and tells me that's not going to work, because I also have the opportunity to coach them and help them understand why it will, or maybe I didn't see something they saw and they can educate me. Same thing with number 7, 7th most common reason employees don't do what they're supposed to do. They think they've got a better way to do it. Again, great, because they're thinking, and we have a chance to talk about it, and I want to enhance that. What's the worst thing I can do is tell them, no, just go back and try it my way, because what happens after I do that 3 or 4 times? What are they going to stop doing? Thinking. And then the next thing you know, I'm sitting there saying, I wish someone else besides me would think around here, but unintentionally, who trained them not to think? Now, as we look at that as well, the top 5 reasons employees don't do what they're supposed to do, if we look at 1 through 5, whose job are 1 through 5? 1 through 5 is management's job. The top 5 reasons employees don't do what they're supposed to do has more to do with us as leaders and managers than it does with the employees. That's the good news, because we have control over ourselves. We get the right tools, we can improve that. And we talked about this. Let's see if you remember what I said just a few minutes ago. What percentage of performance issues are related to work direction? Anyone remember what that percentage is? What percentage of all performance issues are related to ineffective work direction? Anyone remember? It's a percentage. It's a nice round one. 80%? Not quite that high, 50%. All right, so up to 50%. But in some cases it's 80 without a doubt, especially early on in someone's career. So or in their position. So we've got up to 50% of performance issues are related to ineffective work direction. So in our Effectively Leading and Managing Performance program, what do? We look at 3 areas. We start with clear work direction, then look at how do we improve that performance coaching, then look at performance planning and evaluation. And so that's a cycle that should constantly be going in both directions, but it always has to come back to that clear work direction. And notice as well, we'll talk a little bit more later, but that performance planning, okay, and evaluation. Note that those annual performance meetings should be more about planning for future performance than on reviewing the past. We do need to review the past and get agreement on that, but we like to call them performance planning meetings, not performance reviews, not performance appraisals, not performance evaluations, because that's all only looking backwards. There's not much I can do about what's in the past. It helps me form what my plan is for the future. So therefore, we want it to be performance planning, more focused on future and more positive goal orientation instead of looking at the past and what we can or can't change. So what do we look at in our Effectively Leading and Managing program? We have multiple different tools we look at. And so here are the few of the tools. Top priorities tool. Most people say they've got better ability to provide direction in this tool that can take them less than 15 minutes to complete with an employee. So our top priorities tool is our quick, down and dirty. If there's one tool you take away from this program that's absolutely critical, it's this one. Let's get clear about what's most important with our employees and continuously track that and have conversation about what needs to be done. Then we take it to level 2 where we look at our job tracks where we get into key results and critical tasks. And you can see there when we said earlier about why employees don't do what they're supposed to do, they don't know what they're doing, they don't know what they're supposed to be doing, they don't know why they should do it, and they don't know how. So that hits 3 of the 4 most common reasons employees don't do what they're supposed to do. Then we look at effective performance planning and review process, and we look at an even more developed tool that some of you will be ready for called our Adaptive Fit tool and prioritization. So those are the 4 tools in our Effectively Leading and Managing program you come away with that will help you avoid mistake number 2. Now let's take a look at mistake number 3, misdiagnosing situations. So roughly half of all decisions made by managers when there's an issue and a problem result in misdiagnosis. I'll give you a quick example. Just the other day I got a call from a leader, a general manager, and said, I need to send one of my managers to your workshop, to one of your workshops. I'm not sure which one I should send him to. And this happened to be a service employee, service department manager. He said, should I send him to this training or this training? I said, well, that's interesting. Tell me, before I can tell you which one, let's discuss what's going on. And it came out that he had actually been to training a couple different times. And I asked, well, if his life depended on it, could he do the job? And he said, well, of course he could do the job. I said, well, that's interesting. So he already has the knowledge, which means it's not a capabilities issue. And you said he can do it, but he's choosing not to. Would you agree with that? And a light bulb went off, and the general manager said, yeah, I would. I said, okay, well, then actually let me coach you on how to have a conversation with him about his desire to do the job, because it's not a capabilities issue. It's a motivation issue. So that was an example of a misdiagnosis. And he was fully ready to invest in his employee, and I applauded him for that. The problem was he had the wrong solution. And so he was going to waste some time and energy on that when he really needed to have a heart-to-heart conversation about whether this was the right job and whether this person was going to be motivated to do that job or not. And if it wasn't, he had some flexibility in fitting a role for that manager's motivational profile. So we're going to go by that one. And ultimately, one of the questions that we have to ask is people or process. Okay? In misdiagnosis, one of the things I see probably the most common mistake with regards to misdiagnosis is answering this question effectively. Are our people causing our process issues, or are our processes causing our people issues? And effectively diagnosing that. We spend a fair amount of time looking at that particular issue, and how do I determine that? And oftentimes we create people issues because of a process we implemented. For example, maybe one or two of our salespeople aren't completing their sales paperwork. So I implement a new process for a checklist. What happens? Well, the salespeople that are doing a good job now have extra work to do because there are a couple that aren't doing the job. And what's the likelihood that a salesperson that isn't completing their current paperwork and processes, when I add more paperwork and processes, is going to do it effectively? Not very good. But I actually then burden the rest of my good salespeople with more paperwork by implementing another process, which is only going to cause more people issues. And unintentionally, I created more work for myself than what I really needed to, and I decreased the efficiency of my sales department. So understanding how to diagnose the difference between the two is absolutely critical. And we use our Prodaptive leadership and management model to help you diagnose that. What sort of results do we see from getting, if we're able to do that? Well, pre-training, we have you complete an assessment so that we have a foundation. And that effective diagnosis, you can see, hovers around that mid-50s%. Post-training, by the end, this is two different groups that we looked at and tracked. We see that significantly above 80%, sometimes pushing above 90% effectiveness. So within just a couple days, we're able to increase our ability to diagnose the right situation so that we can then respond to it. A couple of the effectively leading and managing tools, there are Adaptive leadership assessment and related tools. We do a leadership approach analysis for really diagnosing the types of situations I'm really good at and what are some of those that aren't as strong. And then we look at BET, root cause, and BET refers to the 3 different types of root cause and what we need to do about those. So those are 3 tools you take away from the effectively leading and managing to really help you improve. Which brings us to, once we've diagnosed situations and we're not making that mistake anymore, now we need to make sure we respond effectively. And so we want to avoid that mistake of ineffective response. Earlier, we said that there were 2 general types of personalities and approaches, and we have those that are more directive on this side and maybe those leaders that are naturally more supportive here. Well, all of leadership behaviors can be boiled into directive or supportive type leadership approaches. And so because we said earlier we all have a bias towards one or the other, what do you think? What's the likelihood most people and leaders are good at adapting this entire spectrum from when almost all direction is needed and very little support to when almost only support is needed and very little direction? What do you think? Okay, I'll give you a little more information. So we break it down into 5 different leadership approaches. A focusing approach is primarily direction. It has a little bit of support, but it's most direction. And then as we move to these different types of leadership approaches, we increase until when we're in commending, we're almost purely supportive. So in looking at that, let's take a look. What do you think? What percentage of leaders, let's take a good guess here. What percentage of leaders are good at all 5 of those leadership, understanding that we have to constantly shift from directing and supporting and that it changes across the types of situations required that? What percent do you think of leaders are effective at all 5 of those leadership approaches? Okay, so it looks like we're saying 10 to 25%. Those are pretty good guesses. Well, the important word there is effectively doing each of those. The actual answer is less than 5%. Okay, so those of you that said 10, we're pretty close, but less than 5% of leaders are effectively strong in all 5 of those leadership approaches. And as a matter of fact, what our research is telling us is that a majority of leaders only use 2 of those 5 styles effectively. Let me say that again. Almost half, over half of all leaders only use 2 of those 5 leadership approaches effectively, which tells us a lot of us have a fair amount of opportunity. Now, there are different types of situations. And looking at our effectiveness, and we'll do another quick poll here, and looking at that, one of the studies myself and Dr. Michael O'Connor recently did here in looking at this data with leaders was how many leaders overmanage or micromanage when things are going well, when they don't need to? What do you think? Let's go ahead and respond to that one. What percentage of leaders overmanage in favorable situations when things are going well? All right, so we're getting several there. Not below 30%. You're absolutely correct. It's not above 80%. Okay, so that's good. And we see you're correct. A majority has the correct answer. 70%. It's actually 72% was our latest number. 72% of leaders and managers overmanage in favorable situations. So what's that mean? In favorable situations, 7 out of 10 of us are unintentionally demotivating employees. Because how many of you like to be told how to do your job when you already know how to do it? I have very few hands go up when I ask that question. But that's what we're doing unintentionally as leaders. And believe me, it's mostly unintentionally. And what does that do to someone's motivation when they feel like they don't have the ability to control their own performance and their own job when they're fully capable? It's highly demotivating, just like it is to us when our boss tells us how to do something when we already know how to do it. So that's a real opportunity. The other thing that really tends to motivate people, and we spend a little time discussing this in the training program, is how many of you feel like you don't spend enough time at work? Probably not very many. Okay, a lot of us would love to get a few hours every day of our life back. Well, if we're over managing and micromanaging people that don't really need that direction from us, guess what? We're wasting our time and their time. The most extreme example I ever saw of that was I had a gentleman I was coaching. He went from 70+ hour work weeks down to 35 hours a week in less than 3 weeks because he was so bad at micromanaging. He had hired, his organization had grown. He just kept doing the things he had always done, even though he hired people to replace them. And as a result, what happened? His week just got bigger and bigger and bigger. Once he let go of that control, they were so motivated and so excited to do the job, and he was finally letting them. They did such a great job. His work hour was reduced by over 30 hours a week. Needless to say, when I chatted with him, a year later, his golf game was right back to where he liked it to be. He was able to get out and do some of that again. All right, and the key word there as well as we look at that is effective response. A lot of leaders will shift their direction and support, but they won't do it effectively. So unfortunately, they end up where their employees are experiencing some of these ineffective leadership styles. And again, almost nobody is perfect at all of these, so most of us have a pretty good opportunity to learn from those. So what do we do in trying to be more effective? In our effective leadership and management training program, these are several of the tools that we give you to do that. We look at a leadership simulation and case study. Yes, there's a little competition for those of you that like to compete with prizes. As well as we do video case studies. We also will oftentimes do role playing. We've got a quick coaching guide. This one's really surprised me. We developed this a few years ago, and what we're finding is that within less than 5 minutes per employee, managers are telling us they have a better coaching game plan in less than 5 minutes with this coaching quick guide than they've ever had before, in less than 5 minutes. And so taking that one tool away and using that has radically transformed many of their ability to manage more effectively. We've got some good flow charts for you here as well. Help you understand the difference between motivation and capability, and then also look at what are some of those recurring situations. We dig in deep to those. Let's see a show of hands. Just say yes. I'm going to throw that chat box up there again. Let's see, just say yes here. If you have a situation that keeps popping up that you just can't seem to get resolved, you're playing that problem whack-a-mole, and no matter what you seem to do, it just keeps popping back. We've all got them. We've all got them. And what that generally tells us is there's something going wrong with our diagnosis or response. There's an opportunity to change that to get that result. And again, I love the fact that everyone's being honest there. We've all got those issues that keep recurring. And so we dig into those, really find out what's the root cause, and we'll make sure you have the tools to go home and address those when you get back. So let's take a look at our last. So we've got just a couple minutes remaining here. Our last mistake is a lack of effectively adapting. Once we understand and have those tools, what happens? We've got to go implement. We've got to go make it happen. And so in doing that, what do we need to do? We need to change our approach. And so we need to continuously get better. For those of you that have heard of a gentleman named Warren Bennis, he's one of the fathers of leadership. One of the things that he tells us is that to the extent that any single quality determines success, that quality is a person's adaptive capacity. And that's getting just to be more and more the case. because the world around us is nothing but change. And actually, it's becoming more critical as well because we know that the next generation tends to be oftentimes more adaptable than the leaders that they have. Why? Because they've only lived in a world of change. They've had to adapt constantly. And what do we see about the research? We know that those organizations and leaders consistently, significantly outperform those that are less adaptable. So ultimately, our tools are to help you adapt to the different situations that you're faced with. Now, in that chat box, we're going to go ahead again. I'd like to ask you, what percentage of productivity increase could you get with great leadership and management? What do you think? If you had great leadership and management, how much more productivity increase could we get? 35? I like to see that. 20? Most common answers are at least 20% above. Now, what we're seeing here is a lot of different answers, a lot of good. I love to see that. So what are we going to do to get that? What are the tools we're putting into our toolkit? And now let's take that number that you just jotted in there, and you should do this calculation. Okay. Now, I picked a number. This will vary somewhat based on your industry here. But at average sales per person, if we increase by 20%, what does that do? That's an extra $100,000 of revenue per employee at only 20%. And almost everybody had something higher than 20%. How many of you think life would get a little bit better if every employee was able to help generate up to $100,000 more in our business? And let's also take a look at same thing with gross profit. If we look at how much of that are we going to be able to keep? 20% of $150,000, that's $30,000 per employee more per year that we can use to pay them more, to develop and implement more into our infrastructure, etc. So let's go ahead and start wrapping up here. Jim Collins, the gentleman who wrote Good to Great, shared with us. Okay, oops, excuse me, jumped on the wrong slide there. Jim Collins shared with us, no company can consistently grow revenues faster than its ability to get enough of the right people to implement that growth and still be a great company. If a company consistently grows revenue faster than its ability to get enough of the right people to implement that growth, it simply will not simply stagnate, it will fail. And so as you think about that, and Jim Collins' advice there, don't get too confused by everything that's out there. We can looking at all those different tools here. We talked a lot about what we need to do to avoid those 5 mistakes. So the last thing we do in our Effectively Leading and Managing program is what? Prioritized action plan. Just a few. What are those biggest impact things, tools you can take back and implement to start achieving more success and fulfillment, more profitability, more commitment, etc. And those, I will admit that those that send a couple of people into the program are going to have a little bit of an advantage. It's really nice to have 1 or 2 other people with you that you can go back, hold each other accountable, and really take your leadership to the next level. If you're by yourself, I'll also give you the tools to take back, teach those other leaders and managers what you learned, and then give you one activity that will take you less than 10 minutes per week to help you implement the most important aspects from this leadership and management program. So with that, I'm ready to wrap up. Thank you for spending the time with us, and I'll share one closing thought with you. There are 2 primary choices in life: accept things as they exist or accept the responsibility for changing them. And so, as Robert Frost tells us, at many points of our life, 2 roads diverge in the woods. So am I going to keep doing things the way I've done them before? Or am I going to avoid a lot of those 5 mistakes management make, get some of those tools, and start helping my organization perform at a higher level? So with that, thank you very much for spending some time with us. We'd love to have you. I'd love to have you join me for our Effectively Leading and Managing program and training April 2nd through the 4th in Fort Lauderdale. If you have any questions, please contact us at 800-772-3377 or info@Spader. You can also go out to our website and gather more information. And again, we would love to hear from you if you have any additional questions about the presentation materials here or about the program. With that, thank you very much, and everyone have a happy and blessed holiday season. Thank you.